to you all to this webinar concerning the present situation in Hong Kong regarding the democratic freedoms. As you all know, the Chinese authorities have imposed recently a security law aimed to crack down democracy and freedom, and in spite of the agreement that she was supposed to respect, a basic law negotiated and agreed with Britain in 1997 and supposed to last 50 years. This new security law has a broad capacity, and we all could be prosecuted by their judicial system simply by speaking and discussing this issue. Criticizing the government, the Communist Party could put us all under the umbrella of what they considered a foreign intervention, ideas of secession, you name it. The security law is supposed to have an extraterritorial application. Although the main topic of this discussion is Hong Kong, let's not forget the human rights in the Xinjiang province, the reality in Tibet, the military tension at the South China Sea, the threats against Taiwan, the absence of a free press, and quite a few other human rights abuses. And in spite of all this, the EU has signed a comprehensive agreement on investment with Beijing. But let's hear our panel, and I present you two members of the European Parliament, Isabel Santos from the Socialists and Democrats group, Reinhard Butkofer from the group of the Greens, and Nathan Law, an activist from Hong Kong, a former member of the Hong Kong Legislative Council. Isabel Santos, you have the floor.
Thank you, Paulo, and let me start by thanking you for the moderation of this debate, where I'm pleased to be accompanied by my colleague Reinhard Butkofer, one of the MEPs targeted by the recent sanctions imposed by China, and to welcome Mr. Nathan Law, a fierce Hong Kong democracy activist exiled in London. I also would like to address a sincere thank you to Fight for Freedom, Stand with Hong Kong, which made this debate happen. And I would like also to welcome the representation of Chinese embassy inscribed for this debate. China's authoritarian oppression is currently on full display. Hong Kong is being taken by this regime, and so it is its much praised rule of law, as well as territory's independent legal system. Every single basic freedom and fundamental rights guaranteed to Hong Kongers by the 1984 Sino-British Declaration is now being totally eroded away. This has been the case most notably after the entry into force of the national security law in July 2020, Beijing's response to Hong Kong's pro-democracy protests. The subsequent escalation and the events taking place since then, we know it all, over 10,000 people have been arrested for crimes introduced by the new legislation, such as rioting, unlawful assembly, arson, or possession of an offensive weapon, while nearly 600 of these were arrested. Among these, there is Mr. Tsilun Kok, a young Chinese and Portuguese citizen, one of the 12 Hong Kong pro-democracy activists accused of attempting to illegally cross the border into Taiwan in August 2020. Tsilun, for whom I requested without success a visit to the Chinese authorities, maybe the representatives of China embassy in this debate can give me a positive answer today, and for whose basic human rights I continue advocating for, have already served a 7-month prison term in China and is currently awaiting trial in Hong Kong, as many of his friends. Besides the systematic and highly visible suppression at domestic level, the crackdown moves at full speed and knows no limit or borders. This piece of legislation has an alarming extraterritorial component, which makes it virtually applicable to any person that commits an offense against Hong Kong, and means what it means, this offense. This means that not only Hong Kongers, but also us here today, present in this virtual room, are threatened too. However, neither this will prevent us from fighting authoritarianism and do everything to our disposal to bring back Hong Kong's autonomy, nor the recent sanctions imposed by China to the Subcommittee on Human Rights and other members of the European Parliament will stop us from denouncing China's abuses. Whether fighting for Hong Kong's democracy, upholding press freedom in Macau, advocating for fundamental liberties in Tibet, or combating China's repression of Uyghurs in Xinjiang, we will firmly stand against China. Lastly, as a closing remark, this debate is also an opportunity to rethink the EU-China relations. If it is true that China is the EU, one of the EU's largest trade partners and a global actor with potential to contribute to the solution of a number of worldwide issues, it is no less true that EU cannot be complacent with a country where human rights are constantly violated, and the political determination is the only law. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Isabel, for your words. Now I will give the floor to Reinhard Butkofer, and just a quick reminder for those who want to address our panel. In due time, we will take your questions. But in just to stress what Isabel just has pointed out, that Reinhard Butkofer is one of the MPs that is under sanctions from the Beijing. Reinhard, you have the floor.
Thank you, and thanks for having me in this conversation. As has just been said, China is ignoring several legal obligations that the country signed on to in order to impose Beijing's will on the citizens of Hong Kong. That pertains to the Hong Kong Basic Law, which is being turned upside down. It pertains to the Sino-British Joint Declaration from the 80s. It also pertains to the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. And just to show the absurdity of the oppressive measures, I want to point out that a number of leading Hong Kong Democrats, including Martin Lee, who is the father, or some say the grandfather, of Hong Kong democracy, an octogenarian, prestigious lawyer, he and others have been found guilty of leading a peaceful protest of about 1.7 million Hong Kong citizens in 2019, and they will be sentenced tomorrow. Chinese leadership demonstrates its will not to accept any restraints against the absolute authoritarian rule of Xi Jinping and his party center. And they are not willing to pay attention anymore to the international public opinion, nor to international obligations that the country has formally accepted. But the national security law was just a beginning for the intended transformation of Hong Kong into just another mainland city. We have seen more recently the changes to the electoral law that I don't think we should describe as electoral reform, because the so-called reforms lead to the effect that elections will not play a role in Hong Kong in the future. The number of members of the Legislative Council that will be elected by popular vote will drop to just 20 out of 90 overall. All the others will be appointed in one way or the other. And even those that are allowed to be elected will have to be vetted through 3 different CCP-controlled institutions before they can even run. And candidates for the leader of the executive of Hong Kong government are also not going to be allowed to run unless they have explicit CCP report. So in a way, in order to extinguish the flames of democracy, China is putting in place a regime that you could describe as 2 braces and 2 belts on top of it in order to exclude any opportunity of somebody who could be popular getting elected if they are sustaining democratic ideals. I believe that it is of paramount importance that we not just describe and criticize, but that we also find actions to show in which way we're willing to support Hong Kong citizens and to oppose China's aggressive policies. And the European Parliament has voted a resolution this January, expressing a widely shared agreement on how we should deal with Hong Kong and the problems for the citizens there. And this includes measures on different dimensions. And I will just mention a few. For instance, I would say there is a need to offer safe harbor options for Hong Kong citizens that want to make use of them. Also, I believe that we should continue raising Hong Kong as an issue in the international arena, for instance, by creating a Hong Kong contact group of like-minded countries that will pursue a course of putting Hong Kong on the agenda in different international fora. I do not think that we should allow ourselves to just sit back and take an attitude of deplorable and reluctant recognition of well, that's how it is. We cannot change China's policies, but we can support Democrats and we can make China pay a price for their aggressive policies. And this is what the European Union should do even more than it has. And there is a need to revise policies. And there is, I'm happy that some member countries of the European Union suspended extradition agreements that they had with Hong Kong, which would be completely unmerited under the present circumstances. But there still is an extradition agreement between Belgium and the PRC, which I think should be revoked. So we have to do some homework to signal that we didn't just make a comment or two for the time being, but we're in this for the long haul, and that we're willing to support any fight for democracy as much as we can. Thank you.
Thank you, Reinhard. Now we are going to listen to Nathan Law, who knows from the inside the situation in Hong Kong. Nathan, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Paulo. And before I make any comments, let me thank you once again for the leadership of Reinhard and also the support of Isabel for all these China policies and being very strong on supporting human rights in Hong Kong, in Xinjiang, and also in China. These are crucial allies that we are very grateful that we have, and I'm really looking forward to work together in the future. And for me, I'm Nathan. I'm a Hong Kong activist now in exile in London. The reason why I had to fly out of Hong Kong was definitely because of the implementation of the national security law. And before I get into detail, the situation of Hong Kong now reminds me about a story. In 1990, the Czech people finally enjoy a right to vote after the Velvet Revolution in 1989 and the restoration of the parliamentary democracy. The last time they voted in a free and fair election was 44 years ago. And in that particular election, no one knew that when they cast the ballot into the box, it was the last time they vote. It took generations of time for them to vote again. And I think the same thing is actually happening in Hong Kong. In 2016 and in 2019, in the Legislative Council election and the District Council election, people went to vote, didn't know that were their last votes casting in Hong Kong's electoral system. In 2016, which in the election that I was being elected as the youngest ever legislator in Hong Kong at the age of 23. By then, we've got around 50% of the seats through direct election, and the opposition camp could still play a certain role in the Legislative Council to speak up for people, even though they can never get majority, no matter how popular they are under this peculiar system, the design of the Legislative Council. And for now, as just what Reinhard said, there is no meaningful participation in the council now because the government has added a vetting process that are led by the political police in Hong Kong, and also the proportion of the direct elections is dropped drastically. And in 2019, the district council election, even though that was a consultative body without any legislative power, but it was the election through direct vote, and the pro-democracy camp won a landslide victory. They got 388 seats in 450 seats. So that is a huge blow on China's confidence on the control of their control in Hong Kong. And it actually signals that if China wants to have complete dominance, they have to do something. So I guess the implementation of the national security law in 2020 was in response to the willingness of Hong Kong people to resist and to quash our freedom, because we are in solidarity and we pursued for democracy with all costs. After the implementation of the national security law in last June, and it circumvented all the local legislation and consultation process in Hong Kong, it was directly imposed by Beijing. A lot of our freedoms are being quashed. Our freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, and freedom of even political thoughts are vanished under the law. There are more than 100 arrested cases under the national security law. Some of them are arrested because of displaying certain leaflets, because of chanting certain slogans, even though they're committing in a peaceful manner of expressing their political opinion. Once the government considered as violating the national security law, breaching the national security law, which actually no concrete definition was given. The boundary is completely defined by the Chinese Communist Party, and these people are going to be trialed under the national security law, where jury box can be denied and closed hearing could be proceeded. Under that condition, people's rights to speak up freely and to express their political opinion are largely restricted. And by the time I read through the draft or the content of the law, I realized that it's merely impossible for us to continue our advocacy work in Hong Kong. So that I actually flat out of Hong Kong before it was officially implemented. And 2 months after, I was listed in the wanted list as a fugitive under the national security law, which means that it is just impossible for me to return to Hong Kong because the maximum penalty of the law is lifelong imprisonment. And they don't need much to convict you. Basically, the advocacy for accountability for China and to address the human rights violation in Hong Kong and Xinjiang. These are the so-called evidence of the crime, and you'll face decades of imprisonment, if not lifelong ones. So for me, I became asylum seeker in the UK, and my refugee status was confirmed just a couple of weeks ago. And if you look back to my life journey, it's actually a rhythm of the heartbeat of the city. The encounterings of mine for the previous few years, from a student leader to an elected lawmaker, and being disqualified afterwards, being jailed in the prison because peaceful assembly, and the fact that I had to flat out to become a refugee in the other country really shows that the deterioration of Hong Kong's freedom, especially under the freshly implemented national security law and the overhaul on our election announced just a couple of weeks ago. If you look back to the 12 Hong Kong people case who are being kind of talked back to mainland China, actually, with the assistance of the Hong Kong police and the Chinese police, allegedly, it really shows that the protection of the one country, two system we should enjoy are gone, and not only our personal freedom, but the freedom from fear and the freedom from harm are also gone. And that is a huge signal on the situation of Hong Kong. Therefore, I think under that framework of Hong Kong's freedom, it's so clear that one country, two system does not exist anymore. Autonomy, democracy, and rule of law in Hong Kong are being destroyed. And I think the EU as a huge organization that advocates for human rights and built for that has a strong need to respond to the situation very strongly, including upscaling the sanctioning list to include Hong Kong officers who are committed to human rights violation, including offering more safe boat plan for politically persecuted individuals in Hong Kong, and also gearing up themselves to decrease the reliance on China's manufacturing link in order to achieve certain independence to be more available for the criticism of China. And last but not least, we should really correlate, I think, more correlation with other like-minded allies to implement democracies and to uphold democratic values around the world. The rise of China and the fall of Hong Kong is definitely a big backdrop of the huge democratic decline globally in the past 2 decades. And if we don't act together alongside with the other democracy allies, then it's most likely the rise of authoritarian, the trend and the trajectory of it will continue. And the values of democracy will be deteriorated in the longer run. And that is definitely the worst things happening on our humanity. So I think in order to achieve a goal of reversing that trend, we have to work together, and the EU should be the champion of promoting democracy and human rights. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nathan. Thank you for your words. Now I have a very provocative question for both MPs regarding the agreement that was known by the end of December, this agreement between the European Union and Beijing. One question arose to me: are we trading human rights for profits? Isabel, you want to answer this?
We shouldn't trade human rights for profits. And after this answer from China, when we uphold sanctions against officials that are violating human rights in several parts of China, we must answer to this, and we must rethink our position. And the European Parliament, in my view, don't has conditions to give a say, a yes to this agreement. This agreement must be rethinked. But and I think that the strategy is not to relocate more European industries in China. It's to give conditions for that industries come back to Europe. And we must have one strategy that strengthen our autonomy and stop with this exchange of values, because we can't go ahead with this process. And we must be very clear in what are our principles when we are dealing with China. I don't know if the China government understand what are values, but we know very well. And if we lose our values, if we sell our values for profits, so what it will remain as the European project? I don't know. So in my view, we have two levels of action at this moment. One is, of course, review our extradition agreements. And as Portuguese, everybody understand, I'm sure that Paulo understands more than nobody here, but everybody understand what I'm saying. In a country where the review of extradition was not approved in the parliament, a motion for this review. So we must stop our extradition agreements. We must be very principled in our dialogue with China. We have a dialogue between China in what is related to human rights, and this is being delayed again and again. This dialogue can't be no longer delayed. And we must be very clear on this dialogue, and we must be very clear in what is related with business. Yes, we want to do business with China, but we don't sell our values for business, and we must be clear on this. And I think we have another level of action that is very important, and this is our relation, how to strengthen our relation with civil society in Chinese territories. Of course, don't putting them to risk, of course, taking always their security conditions in count. But I think we can help the civil society in China, in other Chinese territories under Chinese administration, like Hong Kong, Macau, Taiwan, we need to do this, and Taiwan is a different, it's a different situation, of course, but we need to have this work with civil society. We need to talk with Taiwan, and we need to have more diversified relation, external relation with countries in this region. Don't talk only with China. It's important, the dialogue with India and with other countries from this region, countries that are very important and have a huge weight. So it's, for the first answer, I think it's enough to give the time for others.
Reinhard, you want to address this regarding the agreement and this look for profits from the European Union, especially taking it into the account that it was the big bosses in Germany that have pressured a lot for this agreement with Beijing?
Well, first of all, I would say very generally that we can do both. We can walk and chew gum at the same time. We can trade and criticize at the same time. But we should not allow unprincipled trade-offs between trade and human rights, or trade-offs between trade and climate policy, for instance. This deal that was indeed pushed hard from Berlin, unduly timed, and also against opposition from quite a few EU member countries. This deal has been criticized from the very beginning because it did not pay attention to our own standards, or what we should fight for as our own standards with regard to human rights. That is particularly visible when you look at the so-called sustainability chapter, which also includes labor protections. There, we don't find any conclusive language on the deplorable Chinese practice of forced labor imposed on hundreds of thousands of Uyghurs. There is a vague promise that China will continue to work towards ratification of pertinent ILO core conventions, but there's no pledge that this will come to a result over the next 10, 20, or even 50 years. It's just a polite way of saying, don't bother us, get off our back, we're going to move when we want to move. This is not acceptable from an EU point of view. This is why the European Parliament has voiced strong criticism of that deal. And even before the sanctions, there were quite a few big question marks as to whether the deal could indeed be ratified if China wouldn't move on that front. And this has not been raised from just one political group. These issues have been raised from the socialists, from the liberals, from the conservatives, and from the Greens too. Clearly, this is unacceptable. But there are also other concerns with regard to human rights, where this investment deal falls short. So we are offering China to have a very friendly treatment with regard to investing in our media, while we acknowledge that China controls the media very strictly. So we do not level the playing field there. We cement a very tilted situation, and we would allow under this deal to have Chinese takeovers of European media without any concessions from the Chinese with regard to media freedom. And a third element that I also find very disturbing is with regard to the operation of non-political organizations in China. Basically, under this deal, the EU would sign on to a regulation that would allow China to control even stronger than it has in the past, to control the activities of non-political organizations, non-profit organizations in China. I think this is utterly unacceptable, and there are very strong reasons to sign, not to sign and not to ratify the deal. Apart from that, I would add that there are increasingly even economic reasons to question the strategy that many companies have been pursuing with regard to China. When you look at the dual circulation strategy, when you look at the 14th five-year plan, when you look at the Made in China 2025 strategy, you will find that China is not out for a long-term partnership with international partners. China is out to take as much advantage of international partners as they can, and to turn that into strengthening Chinese autarky and Chinese domination in the economic sector. And I can understand that some managers that are only thinking short term might still take the deal because their quarterly results will be good. But if you think long term, I think you have to reevaluate.
Thank you, Reinhard. We have a lot of questions, but I have to choose one. So I will put this one from Philippe Givron. He's a coordinator for China within the Amnesty International. So what would be for each of the participants the best political way to promote or enforce human rights evolutions in China? Nathan, you want to give your point of view regarding this?
Yeah, so I think before we get into the question, we have to realize that why China acts so aggressively overseas and on board, and to understand how we can put pressure on them to try to change their behaviors. Let me take Hong Kong as an example. I think there are multiple reasons why China's reach in Hong Kong in recent years have been so aggressive than before, to a degree that we had never expected. But there are two big reasons on the backdrop of that. First of all, the role of Hong Kong as an example of one country, two system in Taiwan has gone. At the very beginning of the design of Hong Kong's one country, two system, it was actually serving the purpose of showing Taiwanese people that if they have the so-called reunification with China, they can still preserve their own way of life. But the recent opinion from the Taiwanese people in the elections shows that that kind of like peaceful reunification, so-called reunification with China is impossible. So Hong Kong's role as a demonstration of one country, two system is gone. And the second would definitely be the growing confidence of China on its authoritarianism. After Xi Jinping took his power, he introduced the confidence doctrine into the founding philosophy of the Chinese Communist Party, showing that they have the path confidence, which means that they don't see the Western liberal democracy as something they have to learn from. If you look at what Deng Xiaoping has said in the opening up period, they said that they have to catch up the West, which means that the West is actually a target to be pursued and it's something that the Chinese government should learn from. But for now, after the introduction of the path of confidence, the Xi Jinping has so much confidence on its way of governing the country, on its authoritarianism, and he sees it as much more superior. So the old role for Hong Kong as a demonstration of progress, as a demonstration of the Chinese community breaching the liberalism in the democracy, has gone. So under that backdrop, the Xi Jinping does not need Hong Kong as a sign of progress and to convince the other countries they're opening up. So I think under these two notions, we've seen huge human rights violation in Hong Kong. And I think the important thing for us for these fights is we have to recognize the fact that the Chinese government is launching a complete ideological war to attack democracy and to uphold their authoritarianism. And our counter measures should also surround the fact that we need to defend democracy in its essence and for its core, and to apply pressure to China to let them to have a concept of walking towards that direction instead of to the authoritarianism that they consider more superior than democracy. So I think we should have all-rounded strategies focusing on that area. And by having so, when Hong Kong is seen as a progress of the path towards democratic values, then situation could be changed.
Thank you, Nathan. I will put a question now to Isabel, because we have a lot of questions. You don't have too much time. So do you think the European Union have a unified approach or based in each one approach regarding China? Let's look at this in perspective. Italy has made an agreement to be part of this Belt Silk Road, and then we have the investments of China in Portugal, in EDP, in newspapers, in the banking system, in all. Quite a few others. You have the Porto de Pireu in Greece. So how is it possible for the European Union to have the same answer to China regarding the values, the human rights?
Yes, we don't have a unified approach, and we don't have a unified approach in these issues and in many issues, because you know very well that that is one of the problems of the European Union. And it's more visible and it's more dangerous when we are dealing with our external policy. And when we are dealing with a counterpart like China, we need to come to a unified position in what is related with Chinese investments in different sectors. And we need to come to a clear position in this dialogue with China, because when we are talking with different voices, we are weaker. And this is what is dangerous for Europe in this matter and in other matters. One of the aspects that I think it would be important for have a stronger and unified voices is to come to a different system of decision in what is related with foreign affairs issues. The Council, in my opinion, it's important that in foreign affairs issues and in human rights issues, when human rights are in question, we should come to a different system. Don't take decisions for consensus rule, and come to a different and more democratic and pluralist way of taking decisions. So And of course, we need to have a more principled base of dialogue, and we need to come to a common position, because it is impossible when you have one interlocutor with this position, this aggressive position of China has, and it's a position of dominance. It's not a position of dialogue and understanding. It's a position of dominance. And when we are dealing with an interlocutor with this behavior, we need to talk with one voice, and we need to resolve this question. Maybe the Conference for the Future of Europe come with answers, to new answers for this problematic, and I hope so. I hope so, that that moment come with new answers for this double voice and triple voice and quadruple voice way of dialogue. I hope so.
Thank you, Isabel. Reinhard, when we look at the investments of China, for instance, in Australia, there is China uses the freedom of trade to strengthen their path to a new international order that would put autocracy more strong. So with these investments, I remember in Germany, 2018, they bought KUKA, a very important company. So China uses these investments, this weakness of our system, the profits, to impose and silence the opposition. And we can see that, for instance, here in the Portuguese Parliament quite recently about the censorship in Macau, where the committee said, "No, let's not make a big deal, a big fuss about this. It's not that important." It's very important. Even the foreign minister spoke about it. But in the Portuguese Parliament, the special commission didn't understood that it was that important. So this is the strength of China. They use the freedom of trade to impose their a law of silence regarding the critics for the autocracy. So where's the red line that we should put, that the democracies should put in order to stop this? Reinhard?
Sorry. A former Australian Prime Minister was once asked what motivated Australia's China policy. And he said, well, two words: greed and fear. And I believe this applies also to much of Europe's China policy. But Australia has started moving beyond that, even though about 30% of Australia's exports go to China. Australia dared standing up to China and, for instance, demanding Chinese investment into, Chinese analysis of how the coronavirus evolved in Wuhan. And Australia didn't mince words in criticizing some of China's authoritarian policies. If a small country like Australia dares doing that, the European Union certainly, and bigger countries like Germany or France should also be able to do that. I believe that China's biggest strength lies not in the effectiveness of its authoritarian methods, but in our own weakness to stand up for our own values and ideals. And this is, however, I would say, changing within the European Union. It is moving too slow, but I see movement there. The outliers of European China policy have been sort of moving back to the center, if you allow me to use that phrase. So one outlier used to be the 17+1 process, through which China teamed up with 17 Eastern and Southeastern European countries in a separate format, obviously designed to divide and conquer. In the last summit meeting, which was organized online, 6 of the EU members of that format refused to send their prime ministers or their heads of state, even though Xi Jinping offered to be present himself. That's a clear signal that they're disappointed, that they don't think that it helps them, that they are moving back to the choir. And similarly, on the other end, I would say the most China-friendly government that we've had in Europe has been the German government. And in particular, the chancellor has never even used the term systemic rivalry, even though the council formally endorsed those conclusions. I think that this is also beginning to change. And when the chancellor is going to be out in September, the next German government will not be as sycophantic to some of China's policy as she has been. And you see that also developing in the economic realm. Even already in 2016, the EU agreed on new anti-dumping measures dealing with China. Then we put in place the investment screening mechanism, which should be enhanced, but it does exist. We're now discussing about anti-subsidy measures, where we want to fight back against subsidies that are illegal under WTO terms. We're working on an international procurement instrument that would create a level playing field for the procurement markets. And the Portuguese presidency is working hard to pull that off. We're working on human rights due diligence mechanism. We hope to work on a ban on the importation of products of forced labor. So there are autonomous measures that the European Union is looking into or is already trying to implement in order to push back against China's unfair policies. So what is indeed the case is that there is more coherence for economic policy than there is for the more strictly political issues like Hong Kong, Xinjiang, or others. But I would not despair, and I would say that there is a growing understanding that we have to combine the pursuit of more economic resilience, which includes not being dependent on just one supplier, with more political clarity.
Thank you, Reinhard. Nathan, I would like to hear you about this, especially taking it into the account that when the new law, security law, has come into force in Hong Kong, the major financial institutions stood in the territory, Morgan Stanley, Goldman Sachs. So how can we deal with the reality of trade that China understands very, very well, the weakness of the West, and promote values such as freedom and democracy?
Well, that is an extremely good question. I don't think, first of all, I think human rights has its own importance, and using trade to meet human rights is actually exchanging long-term interest to short-term one. And I think it's important that we realize that without a fair international-based rule and without upholding our human rights, there are also consequences. So we shouldn't feel like if we do trade with China, there will be no consequence. There will be no consequence, and there will be no adversary effect to the people living in the European Union and other democracies. And secondly, I think it's important that we provide incentive before we engage in these investment talks. And I have always found my opposition towards the KAI, not only that the timing of the timing of the introduction of the KAI was very unfortunate. It was sending a very wrong geopolitical signal when that was a period of the transition in the US administration. And also it's really crucial for us to have humorous precondition that we can indeed monitor and to ensure that those are being implemented. If you look at the human rights provisions in the KAI, it's impossible for us to vet whether those things are really accomplished by mainland China, especially in the situation that international NGOs in China are basically being expelled and journalism freedom are non-existent. So under that circumstance, it is impossible for us to have a guarantee on whether those forced labor in Xinjiang are being eradicated, given that so much ample evidence are available for us to see it is actually expanding. So for me, if we have to engage with China on this commercial front, the very first thing we have to do is for them to achieve certain enhancement on human rights violation before we get into the talk. For now, we're saying that if we get into the talk with the sign the deal, you have to do this and that. But in the future, we have to say that before we get into the talk, you have to finish this and that. And that is on this occasion, alleviation of Hong Kong's suppression and the eradication of Xinjiang's concentration camp. I don't think there should be any investment deal before China commit into this enhancement, and we can observe the concrete result of that. Only by doing so that we can really see trade as a mobilizing force for tackling human rights violation, and trade to change policy will only be realized.
Thank you, Nathan. We are arriving at the end of our time, but I still have one question for both MPs regarding this Joe Biden proposal for a summit of democracies. How important in these days would be such a summit of democracies? Isabel, can you start with this?
Yes, I can start. Is much important than ever, I would say, because you know very well the illiberal powers are increasing. It's not only the case of China, it's around the world. This time that for democracies to say what they want for the world and to strengthen the space and the way of dealing with these illiberal powers. Because if we are not strong, if we are not together, if we are not working together and having a common view in what is fundamental to deal with these illiberal powers, of course, we will lose this battle. And now we are facing a battle for democracy, for freedom, and for human rights. And it's a crucial battle for our future. And we must have the view of how crucial is this moment, and face this moment with clarity and upholding our values, our common values. So this election of Biden was good news. And I think that gives to democracies and to democratic system a new energy to go ahead. And of course, it's not for free that China was dealing with the EU with this agreement so many years, more than 7 years, and the agreement never came, and came in this moment when Mr. Biden was going to be elected. This is something that I compare to a hug of a bear or a kiss of a snake. And China gave us the kiss of the snake with this agreement, because it's not a clear agreement. The rules are not clear. It's an open agreement, something that is confused, and came in a very timely moment for what are the interests of China. And we must understand this, and we must be principled and clear dealing with this. And I fully agree with Nathan. It's moment to say that, okay, we can go to dialogue, but first we want to see progress. This is the real way of dealing with these questions of human rights, democracy, and freedom.
Reinhard, regarding this idea of a summit for democracy, how important it is, can you address this?
Yes, indeed, and I'm not completely convinced of this idea. On one hand, obviously, democracies must have each other's back. They must defend each other together, and we should not let some countries be singled out and attacked individually by China. That's one side. But on the other side, I would be more in favor, I assume, for a summit of countries that would support a rules-based international order. Because there are some countries, you could think of Singapore, for instance, which are not full democracies, but they still share our interest in a rules-based international order. And we should, when we try to form a united front internationally to push back against China's aggression, that pertains, for instance, very heavily to the ASEAN community of countries. How many of them are really democracies? Indonesia, obviously, but how many beyond that? And would we want to exclude them? Or do we acknowledge that they are a factor of defending international multilateralism? And would we want to bring them on board? So I think we might want to reach out more than just pertain to the full democracies. And by the way, on one hand, it's hardly conceivable that Biden would invite just 25 or 26 EU member states. But on the other hand, if he doesn't invite all Europeans, he would be dividing Europe. That would not be a very positive approach either. So I'm not sure that the plans for November that his administration pursues is yet well defined.
Thank you. Thank you all. We will finish. Thank you, Reinhard. Thank you, Isabel. Thank you, Nathan. Thank you, all of you have been listening to this, and see you next time. Bye.
See you. Goodbye. Thank you. Thank you, Paulo. Thank you to everybody. Bye-bye.